CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and CFL fans? Welcome to packed edition of CFL 110 here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk Network. Welcome to packed edition of CFL 110 here on the
double handle.
There we go. What's going on, folks? Sorry
about it. That was the show. That was just the show. The whole show is just going to be the replay of the intro.
Hey, it's a quick turnaround from WST, but we are locked and loaded and ready to go with a very, very packed edition of CFL 110. Andrew Paterson from Winnipeg Sports Talk, Jeff Hamilton from the Free Press with you. And as you can see from the rundown, there is so much to get to in the Canadian Football League this week, heading into the week of action beginning tomorrow with the return of Chad Kelly hosting the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Great to have you all with us, and thanks for checking out the pod and the show. If you haven't already, let a friend know about CFL 110 and what we've got cooking every Wednesday here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk channel. Just before we dive into all of the action, have to thank our great partners at Garage Living Winnipeg for their support of CFL 110. Folks, the push is on. If you want to have a clean, organized garage this fall before the snow flies, give Pat Knuga and Garage Living Winnipeg a call at 999-1234 to revolutionize your work and play space and make the most out of your garage. It's been a super busy, productive summer for the guys at Garage Living, transforming dozens of garages in and around the city. And now they're gearing up for a very busy fall as the push is on to get clients booked, garages designed, and installations complete before the winter. Don't miss your chance to clear the clutter, organize, and beautify your garage with polyaspartic floor coating, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry, and slat wall storage solutions, along with lift possibilities. You can work on that car, your sled, in the comfort of your beautiful garage all winter long. Check out their website at garageliving.com or give our pal Pat a call. He's loving the move from early morning radio guy to garage designer and is available for you at 999-1234 to book a free in-garage consultation or make an appointment to meet him at their showroom at 981 Main Street. I highly recommend you check out garageliving.com for examples of all their amazing work and give Pat a buzz. Garage Living Winnipeg, garages made for living. All right, Hammer. I know ever since I talked to you in Vancouver after the Bomber Lions game, I knew that listen, if we could have done this show on Monday morning and you weren't traveling, you would have been ready to go. We've had a lot of great shows with a lot to talk about, but this one might be the most packed one yet with everything going on around the league. It has just been, much like the games, they've been wild, and I think the show's going to be as well.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed at just how much there is to talk about. I feel like I've been having these conversations with them in my own mind. I'm extremely happy to be able to share my thoughts and feelings about them. And man, do I have a lot of thoughts and feelings. So let's just get right to it, man.
Let's get right to it.
An hour.
When we did this last week, and it was somewhat fortunate due to travel, we did it a day early. And as we were starting the program, we got the news that, wait a second, Nathan Rourke is back. Well, he wasn't just back. He was at practice the next day, and he started on Sunday for the BC Lions. Now, it was a huge boon for the league, for the BC Lions. Tons of excitement. It just didn't quite go the way that Rourke or the BC Lions were hoping to as the Bomber defense continues their incredible play as of late. A 106-minute shutout streak that was ended on a field goal in the fourth quarter, but another convincing win, dominant performance by the Bomber D, and pretty clear that it's not just going to happen overnight for Rourke and the BC Lions, who are struggling themselves now, losers of 4 straight.
Yeah, I mean, their savior isn't quite there just yet in Nathan Rourke. I think, whether you want to call it unfair expectations, and you can certainly go down that road, and I think that is fair. I think a lot of people, including myself, as I mentioned, on your show on Monday, that I thought that Nathan Rourke was going to come in and be a heck of a lot better. I don't think anybody predicted an 8 for 25 passing, 126 yards total, with 2 interceptions and no touchdowns. Those do not sound or reflect anywhere near the numbers that we saw Nathan Rourke perform and put up in 2022. So I think, while a lot of us thought that the 2022 version would be there, the 2022 version was not. And, I try to go on the side of give him a little bit of rope, give him a little bit of, some time to figure out that offense. And that's certainly what it's going to take. Look, Nathan Rourke is going to be a heck of a lot better, probably even this week. Talk about the disrespect to Ottawa. They're dogs at home against BC, who's lost, as you mentioned, Huss, 4 straight. You got to know they're going to be using that as ammo as they, take to
Bobby Dice gets that field every week. No one believes in them. They're 6-2-1.
But I just think, I think no one imagined Rourke was going to be that bad. And a guy who, but you start to, take a step back and consider the situation, the fact that this guy played a game for the Atlanta Falcons on Friday night, got released, went through the whole NFL waivers, didn't get picked up, had to make this massive decision in BC, signed not just, to come there for this season, but to sign a 3-year deal. Now, we'll get into why it might not be a 3-year deal, but signs a long-term deal with BC, gets here on Tuesday, practices Wednesday, and then is on 3 days of practice to perform against arguably the best defense in the CFL right now. And so, other things to consider that definitely wasn't being talked about before, his 3 biggest targets when he was in BC in 2022 were Brian Burnham, they were Lucky Whitehead, they were Dominique Rhymes, all of which who are no longer with the BC Lions. His 2 top targets in BC right now, and Justin McInnes and Alexander Hollins, both were limited all week. He only got 1 practice with Hollins. I don't believe he got any with McInnes. So there were going to be, some major hiccups in this performance, some major rust. I just don't think anybody assumed it would be that much rust. And I think that's why Nathan Rourke took it on himself, understanding that this was Fam Fest at BC Lions Place with Fred Penner, the headliner at halftime, and 30+ thousand fans in attendance. I think that's why he decided to apologize to everybody for his performance. Let me
ask you this. And I get it, and everything you said is true, and I'll give the guy the benefit of the doubt on that. I know he's going to be better, and we'll be talking a lot about Nathan Rourke. But he didn't look any worse than Vernon Adams did against this Bomber defense a couple weeks ago when Vernon Adams came into the game as the runaway favorite for MOP in the league. Did he just have a bad draw going up a defense that's playing as good as any unit in the Canadian Football League by a lot?
Yeah, look, the BC Lions didn't sign Nathan Rourke based on what he was going to do in his first game back on 3 days, on 3 days practice. I mean, this is a long-term, situation. This is certainly a this year situation because Nathan Rourke is going to get every opportunity to play in front of Vernon Adams, and Vernon Adams is eyeing a return here in the next week or so. Probably not this week, but they're suggesting as early as the end of this month. So if it's not this week, it technically would be, I think, September, depending on where the game falls. Anyways, not trying to get too technical on all this, but the point is Vernon Adams is eyeing a return. I had a chance to talk with Vernon Adams in Vancouver. The one thing I thought was missing in all this Rourke mania was, what about the other guy? The other guy in Vernon Adams, who is currently the front runner for most outstanding player. I can't think of a single example to compare this to in professional sports where you have, 2 guys that are playing at the height of their career right now, battling it out for one position, and so that's certainly the case here. This is where I think it gets really interesting, Hassan, where, because if Nathan Rourke would have come out and been the Nathan Rourke that we all know he can be, I think the noise around VA continues to dampen. But after that performance, and depending on what he does in the weeks that happened here, that's the thing. I don't think Nathan Rourke can have a huge leash, and I don't think the players, his teammates, are going to want to give him that full leash. And I'm not trying to suggest some locker room, division here, but Vernon Adams, and I spoke to him about this over the weekend. He talked about, the opportunity that he's in right now, and that, was frustrated and angered by it. It has been, naturally would be anybody in this situation, his situation would feel. But he played the full teammate role. He knew that, what's at stake this season. It's, they're hosting the Grey Cup this year, the BC Lions. They got a good enough team to make it there. Or they had a good enough team. We'll see what they do down the stretch here. And he knows that the goal is to win. And so he's putting the team ahead of himself right now. He's putting, Rourke ahead of himself right now, quite literally. But there are teammates in that locker room who love VA, love his leadership, and believe that they can win the Grey Cup with him behind center. And I think that's the concern in all this. I think if Nathan Rourke continues to have performances like he did this past week, if that bleeds into this next week here and it bleeds into the next week, I think you're going to get calls for Vernon Adams to be playing, and soon. I think
they'll just do that. I mean, I don't think it'll take the players to do that. I mean, I think Rick Campbell realizes that. I mean, they're in a very, very nice situation with two of the best quarterbacks in the league. And, VA was hurt. Rourke's back. Didn't have a great first game. We'll see what happens. But absolutely, they got to win some football games. And listen, VA looked terrible against the Bombers. And then Rourke did as well. The Bombers have owned Nathan Rourke. I mean, he's 0-4 against Winnipeg in his career. He's 10-1 against the rest of the league. So let's see what happens this week against Ottawa. But there's no doubt it's the most interesting quarterback room, and it's a conversation that's not going to stop anytime soon. Meanwhile, Jeff, Chris Jones is back. The Ticats are in absolute disarray. Embarrassed on the weekend by the Edmonton Elks, down 29 points at home at halftime. They blow out their DC, and Chris Jones comes in like a volunteer position, if you will, because of all the scratch he's getting from the Elks. Thoughts on this move? Now, I believe his sixth team as he tries to complete the run of the entire league working for CFL things. Can this help the Ticats over the course of this season? And is there any chance that this makes them more likely to compete with the Bombers, who have looked so good, as opposed to the Ticats, who have been just dreadful as of late?
So there were a few of us. It's so funny. There were a few of us that were talking, including me and Derek Taylor, in a hotel, Vancouver hotel, waiting for the Bombers to show up for availability. And we, they were running late, so we just start, tossing things at the wall, ideas, particularly around the CFL. And I threw out that question: do you think Chris Jones gets a job in the CFL? Does it come this year? What would it look like? All these things. And I think we all kind of came to a consensus that he definitely wasn't going to get a chance at head coach, but maybe somebody takes a flyer with him, of course, as a defensive coordinator. And then we got into the idea of Chris Jones, who had elevated his, from a defensive coordinator to one of the top head coaches, to a guy who you couldn't hire unless you pretty much gave him your organization. So for him to take, and that being obviously the GM title. So to take a DC position, I thought of two things. Would he do it? I thought he would probably do it. I don't think he's too big for that role, but I wondered, if a coach would be able to trust him on his staff. And I figured his reputation was so bad right now that you wouldn't have a guy who was waiting in the wings, that if your team started to go south, that Chris Jones would take over. I just don't think he has that prowess anymore. And sure enough, hours later, here he is in Hamilton. And I have to, what's even funnier to me, and it's so, I tweeted this exact thing, it's so 2024 Hamilton Tiger Cats to try to fix the league's worst defense with the man responsible for the league's second worst defense in the Edmonton Elks. And they've only really started to improve their play in the last few weeks with Jones kicked out of there, having no say on what's happening. So I think the whole situation, it's very interesting to me. I'm curious about the timing. I've heard some other podcasts talk about, this is Chris Jones's opportunity to come in and work with Scott Milanovic, someone who has a history with in the CFL, and to identify the defense and work towards next season. So I wonder, is this a long-term play for Chris Jones? Is this something that he wants to, is he going to stick with the Hamilton Tiger Cats? Because to me, Huss, and I'm curious what you think, like, they're 2-7 and they are garbage. Like, the Hamilton Tiger Cats are easily the worst team in this league. It's not even a question now that the Edmonton Elks have finally kind of come to life here the last little bit, but they're still not out of the playoff race at 2-8. At 8 games remaining in the season, the Hamilton Tiger Cats need to do what we were saying the Edmonton Elks couldn't do 3 weeks ago. And that's going on a little bit of a win streak here. And that's why I think it's such a critical game this week against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because I do think their playoff lives are hanging in the balance. And that might sound obvious, but win that game and you're right back in the mix. So as bad as Hamilton's been, I don't know what Chris Jones is going to be able to do with such a short turnaround, and a completely, I would have to think, a completely different defensive scheme. Like, what exactly are they going to be able to put out there? How much is he going to get done this week? But really, what is the end goal here for Chris Jones and the Hamilton Tiger Cats? I'm not sure.
Well, heading into Friday, I mean, listen, I think that they're just trying to plug leaks in a sinking ship and trying to look respectable. Because, as I said, they were absolutely humiliated last week at Tim Hortons Field. And, I mean, that fan base and that city deserves better. And the expectations were much higher. I mean, as far as coming in and turning things around this week, good luck with that. I don't think they have the personnel. I certainly don't think that he's going to come in and wave a magic wand and turn this team from the unit we saw against Edmonton last week into a team that's going to come into the toughest place to play in the Canadian Football League and completely turn it around. But I will agree with you in the caveat that if they were somehow able to shock the Bombers as a massive underdog this week, everything's on the table, much like what we've seen, with the Edmonton Elks completely turning their season around. We are into the back nine of the schedule, though, and there's not a lot of time left. I think a loss this week, which is likely, and another one probably takes them out, depending on what happens with Toronto, because I think we can look right now at Ottawa with 6 wins, Montreal running away with the East. Those teams are going to be there come playoff time, and it's a matter of the Argos holding down the 3rd spot over Hamilton. It certainly gives us more to talk about going into what should be a great night at Princess Auto Stadium. Speaking of Chris Jones, the team that he left, the Edmonton Elks, have now sold the franchise to a private owner. We met their first private owner in team history, Larry Thompson, last week. He was a construction guy, sold a longtime season ticket holder, supporter of the team. I will admit the energy level at the press conference might not be where they wanted to really fire up the fan base. But I'll tell you what, the team's doing a good job of that on the football field right now. This is a significant move for the Canadian Football League and one of the flagship franchises that had just been in disarray coming out of the Chris Jones era.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, when Mr. Thompson stepped up to the mic, and I think he talked for probably about 2 minutes, it was very clear that they did not bring this man on board to be the face, of the franchise and to be winning over crowds. Yeah, exactly. I don't think it was that, but clearly the winner of more than 20 different buyers. I read that 23 or 24 people signed non-disclosure agreements, that were interested in purchasing the Elks. That's insane. And that tells me that this guy's got incredibly deep pockets. I mean, that's just obvious. This is a guy who has a vision. Now, one thing that was kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a wrench in the announcement or certainly something that stole attention away from the purchase and the club going private for the first time in their 75 years or whatever it is, was the fact he wanted to change the name back. And to me,
well, you didn't say that. You didn't say that.
Sorry, he didn't. You're right, correct. But reports came out that there was interest in it, and he didn't exactly pour water on it either, Huss. When asked about it, he wasn't I want to set the record straight.
He said that today is not the day to have that conversation. And listen, I'll say this, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I do a show in Edmonton every single day with Dustin Nielsen. The amount of people that say they need to change the name back, it's unlike anything I've seen. It makes no sense to me personally, but it is an undisputable fact that there is thousands of people there, take this for what it's worth, whether it's bullshit or not, but that claim that they're out because of the name change, and if they change the name back, they're in. You've already seen them going with the branding of the double E. There's no doubt we're going to be talking about this at some point, and it will be a topic whether I can't imagine they would go back to the old name, considering what would be. I mean, to me, it would be a backwards move. And for the record, I actually really like the Elks branding. I like the name. A lot of people don't, but it's also why they changed it. And it gets into a hypercharged political debate that takes us to some of the depths of areas on things like X with a lot of people that I don't think we'd normally be having rational conversations with. But there's thousands of people there. And if you're taking over the team, it is something that they have to consider or think about. Whether they go an entirely different direction, I don't know. But it's the elephant in the room when you talk about the Edmonton Elks right now.
The elephant in the room is the fact this team has been garbage since they've been named the Elks. It's not that they've been named the Elks, and winning cures everything. The fact of the matter is they haven't done winning since they changed the name. So we don't even know what the fan base will think about this organization or this club as a winning organization. Because if you tell me, I'll tell you right now, Huss, if the Elks were 9-1 right now, no one would be talking about going back to the old name. No one would be saying that. So I put this on the board. I put on the decisions they made. They put all those things. I don't think anybody's talking about the old name if they're kicking ass on the field.
I hate to say it, but that's not true. There still is a ton of people that are, and as I said, it's not a football conversation. It's a social, it's a political conversation. They feel that they bent the knee to the woke mob, if you will, to use the saying, you'll see it. And as I say, that province is so divided. And it's crazy because, I mean, if you want to look at, I mean, the NDP, not to get too political here, has always had a real stronghold in Edmonton, as opposed to the rest of the. I'm waiting
for you to say Trudeau had an elk ranch farm, back in the day or something.
Let's not even go there. But it's just it's a charged conversation. I am with you though. If they didn't set a pro sports futility record for consecutive losses at home, I don't think it's as big of a deal as it is. But for whatever reason, it is. And I don't think they have this conversation in Washington. I don't think they have it in Cleveland, but they still have it in Edmonton. And it is unresolved moving forward as they look to win fans back. Let's move on, speaking of controversy, to our weekly discussion of the command center, who took another hit after upholding the game-winning TD by Davis Alexander, despite appearing to step out of bounds short of the goal line. Now, we were texting during this game. There was some live betting going on. Yeah. There was a very key missed convert that helped out somebody on this show, not me. That's not the point of this. Watching on TSN, they sort of went in and focused in on the shot where they paused, where it looks like he kind of tiptoed through it. Afterwards, we saw that shot, or maybe he slid into it afterwards. I don't know. The call on the field, that was pretty darn close to being conclusive. I was on Montreal, so I was quite happy it went the way that it was, but it seemed very, very tight, controversial. And listen, if I was on the Riders side of things, I would have been pretty hot. How did you see all that? Was that just straight up a blown call by the command center, or was there enough gray area, if you will, between the green and the white to make it tough to overturn?
Look, I've been pretty harsh on the Riders in the past. Not because I'm from Winnipeg or I cover the team here, because of their organization in the past and other things. I've certainly been a lot, happier for them, I guess, or positive in speaking about them this year. But they got robbed, man. They got robbed. I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't know what anyone is talking about by looking at that view. And this is the part that bugs me in the whole thing, is that while you're watching it on TV, TSN is treating it like it's a catch. Not like it's a run, like it's a catch. And so they freeze the foot that plants, and it's like, oh yeah, he got a foot in, right? Because then on the catch replays, the guy falls out of bounds. And it's like, no, he got his foot in. We're talking about a running play. So if TSN could just play the half a second after the part that they froze, they froze it on that part to the point where you have Glenn Suter saying, "Yep, that's a catch," or that's conclusive, that's in. If you would have rolled it by a half second or a second, you would clearly
see undisputed evidence that he rolls his foot out. There's white dust coming with it. He is out of bounds eventually. He's not out of bounds when he plants his foot originally. I'm not debating that, Huss. He is clearly out of bounds. This is a botched call from the command center. It's arguably one of their worst, in my opinion. And I think what it boils down to is either they don't have the proper enough camera angles that TSN provides them, or they just went off what TSN said. I don't know how you could watch that video, not see the foot drag onto the white line and not call it out of bounds. Like, I mean, that isn't an optical illusion. That's not a mirage. That's not a drag. The guy's foot planted in, Davis planted inside, and then it dragged out. And that's when it touched the white line. There is picture evidence. If you watch it, it's clearly there. It was a botched call by the command center. And anyone who says that it was the right call on the field, you seriously need to go get your eyes checked, because that was an out of bounds play.
Very tight to overturn. Very tight. I wouldn't want to be the guys that had to make that call. I did feel for Dusty and Suitsin, because they were calling off what they were being shown.
But they were being shown.
At that point, exactly. It really looked like that. And then afterwards, it sort of squeaked out. And I do wonder, maybe we'll get some more clarity as to what the command center has at its disposal, whether they're running through forward, or are they just basically getting what they're being shown from the broadcaster.
They're just watching what we're watching. And
I'm really not sure. Hey, we can't get over that game without talking about the real reason why the Riders lost.
Well, and that's it.
And it wasn't that call. It was an all-time brutal game by Brett Lothar, who was 3 of 7 kicking field goals. Missed one at the end of the game, which would have tied it. And most crucially, missed a field goal that was returned 128 yards for a touchdown. The swing of kicking points from Lothar's kicks were 17 points to the negative, and this was a very, very tight game. I kind of likened this game for the Riders to the Bombers game against Toronto earlier this year, where the Bombers offensively did everything but just made a few crucial mistakes that allowed the other team to come in. And obviously they got a tough call as well on the Nick Dembski one, which turns around for 7 the other way, and they somehow lose that game. Trevor Harris was awesome in that game. The Riders were far more productive in just about every area. But man, if your kicker misses 4 and one goes the other way, you're not going to win. This was huge for teams like Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, chasing the teams at the top of the West. But I do think that the Riders deserved a better fate in that one. But this is 3-down football, man. The kicking game is a big, big part of it. When your guy has an off night like that, you may very well lose a game that you should win, and that's what happened.
Well, it's funny, too, because if you go back to that Toronto game, I tweeted out during that game, yes, was that probably pass interference on that, game-altering pick 6? But it's the turnovers that are killing the Bombers, and it's the same story here. Yes, that foot was out of bounds, my opinion. It should be everybody else's, but that game was lost not on that play, because you could make the argument that Montreal scores 2 plays later, right? I mean, he steps out of bounds there. He's still within scoring distance, and the way that Davis Alexander's been playing this year, you have to think that's going to eventually take even more time off and not put the Riders in the opportunity to kick a 48-yard, field goal to tie the game. That's kind of the worst part of it, because after like the third miss by Brett Lothar, obviously that was the conversation. I don't know if the third one was the return touchdown, but even if it was, that was really the part where you're like, whoa. I even tweeted, I'm like, let's find out what the heart rate meter is on this guy, because he is now, swallowed up in this. Like it is a pure mental game here. And sure enough, he botches that last kick. And in between those third and fourth missed kicks, you had Corey Mace on the sideline trying to do everything, right? Like he went over to him kind of like a proud father, and was just like, don't worry about it, man. Arm around him. It's all good, brother. We're still in this game. We're going to get another shot for you to go out there and get it done for us. And
power
that's
of positive thinking.
Totally. And then sure enough, he just botches it. And I'm not trying to put my Twitter timeline on here, but I was really concerned at the end of the game that Brett Lothar would duck the media, because he's done that in the past. He's got a little bit of a history of not talking to reporters post-game. So I tweeted out that he better want to be, he better face the music. And I'm not saying that led to him talking, but credit to him for talking. He had to talk. He had to take that game on his shoulders.
You got to own it,
did,
especially in a market
and
like that.
And he said everything he needed to say. It sounded genuine. This guy does not want to lose games for his team. I think his teammates, they got his back. They're going to support him. He certainly won them games in the past. They needed him to say those things after the game because this is a guy who doesn't go out on the field and smashes heads against the other team. This is a guy who's supposed to kick the ball. Is a guy who has the easiest and lightest workload in the work week all week. Go out there and do your job. So there's people out there, certainly in that locker room, if they're not saying it publicly, are absolutely pulling their hair out that they're losing games because of their kicker, losing a game because of their kicker. Now, I'm interested to see what Brett Lowther can do moving forward here. Is this going to stay in his head? I mean, we all know how important the mental side of the kicking game is, probably more important than any other position in the sport. So we'll see how he can rally from this. He's a veteran guy. I have no doubt that he will, but he's, you got to imagine that worst performance is going to stick with him for a little bit here. And certainly fans are going to be a little bit tighter every time they bring him out here to kick 3 points.
The first couple misses were, absolutely egregious. You just knew when that happened because they should have been up big. They left 8 points on the board in the first half. They got one single, 2 were returned. It is amazing how much, you never see. This is a topic maybe for another day when there's less going on. But there was a time when teams routinely just gave up safeties all the time. That never happens anymore, and guys are running it out. And I think it speaks to the quality of the punting game now and how that's improved. But anyways, it was a wild one, and it was a nice result for the teams chasing the Riders right now. We'll get back to the West in a minute, but coming out of that game, Davis Alexander goes 3-0. Cody Fajardo will start this week against the Elks. Oh, and the Montreal Alouettes, the number 1 team in the league, that is 9-1. Fortunately, they probably should be 8-2 after that game, but they'll take it. Also get Austin Mack, who was a breakout star in the Canadian Football League last year, back from the NFL. All systems go for the Owls with Mack and Fajardo. But, man, you want to talk about boosting your stock around the league. What a month for Davis Alexander, who I hadn't even heard of before he came in as the third stringer a few weeks ago.
Has been around, but hasn't been seen much. And certainly this 3-game study, if you will, playing time, whatever you want to call it, has worked out well for him. I think this is a guy who's going to have a future in this league based off this. I'm not surprised whatsoever that Cody Fajardo has taken first team reps and will start this week. This is Cody Fajardo's team, much like Mike O'Shea here in Winnipeg. Jason Moss is an extremely loyal guy.
I still can't believe they didn't start Fajardo in Regina.
I think it allowed them to. I think it's when you're dealing with a hamstring like that, Huss. Maybe they do if Davis Alexander's not playing, but I really do think.
Why is he the backup? Can he? If he can play? If he can't play, he shouldn't be playing. It just seems so strange that in a game like that, a return of Fajardo as a Grey Cup champ, the MVP, he's the backup for the game. Hey, they won anyways.
So on that side, though, I can see Jason Moss realizing that the moment might be too big. That maybe Cody Fajardo would put too much pressure on himself in that situation and try to take off or try to will himself or do too much and hurt himself.
I think that was part of it. Just take it. Listen, they're in a luck. They've earned themselves the luxury of making those decisions, much like Toronto had last year, not starting Chad Kelly against Winnipeg because they had it all wrapped up. But this Alouettes team is going to be a handful. The rest of the league hopes that maybe they've peaked early, but they are the team to beat right now. And the Red Hot Elks are going to be going into Montreal trying to derail the number 1 team and move their win streak to 4. One of the other great stories last week, and a hell of a football game between Ottawa and Calgary to kick things off, was the return of Jeremiah Masoli. And this is the guy that has had some horrible injuries and some really tough luck. He's been in a quarterback room, pushing Drew Brown, who is back behind center, we believe, this week. But just as far as human stories and a guy that has persevered, you had to love Masoli getting the win, in addition to helping the other teams in the West, as we've been talking about.
Honestly, like I said last week, I think it would have been a victory to finish the game, and just, for himself, clearly not for the team if he had lost, but certainly for himself and his journey, having not completed the last 2 games he played, right? And that's you talk about mental battles, that's got to be up there as one of the toughest ones, and to see him play the way he played. I mean, the numbers I thought were a little bit better than he played, maybe. I don't want to be critical, but he certainly, did the job. He was 4 for 4 on that final drive when it looked like, one last-ditch effort to set up that Lewis Ward field goal, which, by the way, Lewis Ward does kick 50-yarders, man, but he's not really known for them. That's a key one. You gotta think that he was doing that for Jeremiah for sure. But again, this is a guy that's just universally respected across the league. I don't know a single person in any market who's said a negative thing about him. He's been such a cool, calm, collected player in this league. He's been such a talented player in this league. He's rolled with the punches even before his slew of injuries. He had injuries before, but he'd been replaced. Look at Dane Evans out in Hamilton. Like, he's kind of been a good soldier, right? And then to come to the nation's capital a couple of years ago and want to be a guy who could bring some life to that market that had kind of died down since they won the Grey Cup, and to start a new place and to be the guy, and then to have back-to-back years with season-ending injuries, and not just I don't want to downplay any injury, but a torn knee in the way that he took that hit in the first year, and then going through that whole entire process to rehab and come back, and then in your first game back, tear your Achilles of all things. Like, that's one of the most difficult injuries to return from, and not just for football, but his age and where he's at in his 30s. And so for him to just come back and complete that game, but to win it is the cherry on top. And I'm just so happy for Jeremiah Masoli. I'm happy for fans out in Ottawa who continue to put wins after miserable season after miserable season. So all things coming up Red Blacks right now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Masoli. It's just one game. I don't think anybody's looking at him as, the starter or number one that he was before. But if he can get some more opportunities, some more reps here, some more game film, and can do what he's been doing, who knows? Maybe he is quarterbacking for a different team and is able to make his way back to the top of a depth chart somewhere. But I do believe it's Drew Brown's team in Ottawa. I really like what Ottawa is doing, particularly with Bob Dice at the helm. And I just think it's so great that Masoli was able to do what he does, and we'll see if he gets another chance down the road.
Yeah, we expect Drew Brown and Nathan Rourke at center for the Ottawa BC game this week, but that's certainly a great story. And it's kind of an interesting transition from a guy that everybody loves in Jeremiah Masoli to a guy that has many detractors for very good reasons. Chad Kelly is back. He has been reinstated after missing half the season, suspended by the Canadian Football League, has apparently fulfilled what was required of him. It was somewhat of a contentious, the last chance qualify. Bottom line is this guy's down to his last straw in the Canadian Football League, and will be back starting against the Toronto Argonauts. I know you've been covered this quite a bit. I mean, anything other than this guy's on the shortest of leashes from the people around him, I would imagine, at the league, but also from MLSE. And a surprise at all that he goes right back in and starts this week.
Not surprised he goes right back in and starts this week, just because of who they have at quarterback. I mean, it's been
ugly.
Cameron Dukes was good at the beginning. Maybe could have seemed like the guy there for the year if he would have continued playing well. But it's been a bit of a carousel now with Nick Arbuckle and him coming out. So I do think that part's not surprising to me. I think there was maybe some pause there after watching a Nathan Rourke. Nathan Rourke performed so badly on a short practice or on 1 week's practice, but Chad Kelly's been, in and around the team. He hasn't been practicing with them, but he's been in the playbook. He should be able to pick things up within the week a lot better than Nathan Rourke in his situation is, regardless of him knowing the system from 2 years before. Anyways, not surprised by that. I listened to Chad Kelly's interview with reporters, his first time talking to reporters. He said all the right things. He said he was sorry for what he did. He said he knew, the damage. He now understands the damages of his actions after stating very clearly that he did nothing wrong at the beginning. He had mentioned that he was sorry to everybody, including the person involved in the case, his teammates, players, and of course he vowed that he would never do something like this again, and he learned his lesson. Well, you'll have to excuse me. I'm all for second chances. This isn't Chad Kelly's second chance. I guess it's his second chance, if you will, in the CFL, but he has a history here. Words are words, man. They're cheap. Actions, as the cliche goes, speak louder than words. So what really matters right now is what we see from Chad Kelly. I understand the people out there who believe he shouldn't even be in the league anymore. I understand the people's argument that he should get another chance, and if he can prove himself. I just have no trust in this guy proving himself down the stretch. I think if an NFL opportunity wasn't enough of a carrot for him to be on the straight and narrow, I don't think Toronto will be. Him saying, or CFL for that matter, will be. I don't think him apologizing. While you want to believe his words, he has to admit all those things. I said on this show the last couple of weeks, as Kelly was nearing a return, that if he was going to play in the league again, he would have to sit there and talk to the experts, the gender-based violence experts that are part of this whole process, and convince them that he's sorry, or at least say as much, right? So all that needed to be said. So none of that is a surprise. He wasn't going to get out there and defend himself. That he wouldn't be out there if that was his plan. But it really matters. What matters now is how he conducts himself. I mean, he's going to be in the CFL for as long as he behaves himself, but he's got a list of things he needs to follow. That could be, I don't know what the list is, but that could be anything from, consuming alcohol to, any violation of this to whatever, right? It's essentially his parole conditions to be in the CFL. Like you have, the same conditions, the same quiet conditions. I don't know if they're the exact same, but they're probably very close to being the exact same. I could see the CFL just printing out the sheet that they gave to Johnny Manziel those years back. And what happened with that? Johnny Manziel made a mockery of it. He just ended up leaving because he violated them, and it was like goodbye, right? And so I just feel like that's where we're headed. I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm proven wrong, and I don't mind if people tell me months down the road or even years if Chad Kelly is still in this league, that I was wrong, that he was going to get eventually kicked out, because I want him to improve, and I want him to to learn his lessons. But we'll see, man. It's only time will tell. But Toronto gets their quarterback back at a time that they need him, and maybe this does make them more competitive in what's a pretty damn competitive East Division.
Well, listen, he comes with a ton of baggage right now. Like, I don't have an issue with him getting another opportunity. He paid a pretty steep price, missing half the season. I mean, as far as football goes, that's a very significant suspension. He had to do a bunch of things, which apparently he has done. So he's getting this second chance, and he better make the most of it. He's been a knucklehead all his life. I'm sort of with you. I wouldn't be putting a lot on the faith in Chad Kelly that he stays straight. But if he can, maybe he can author this and make people's opinion of him a lot better moving forward. But I mentioned with the baggage, he's got to perform for the Toronto Argonauts, because they're taking some bullets right now for him. And at a certain point, if the hassle with having you on the team isn't worth what you're cutting on the field, they could move another way, although they are tied into him for some big money as well. We'll see Chad Kelly at home against the Saskatchewan Roughriders to begin this week. And back to the Riders, who are the first place team in the West at 5-4-1. You've got BC at 5-5, the Bombers in Calgary at 4-6. The Elks have won 3 in a row, getting off the mat after 0-7. We've been kicking this around for the last week. Like, as we get into the second half and approach Labor Day, who is the best team in the Western Division? Listen, I think BC has the potential to be, if they play to their capabilities with both of their quarterbacks. They're not right now, though. To me, I'm thinking it's Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, and I have a feeling that we're going to get some clarity about where these teams are at, or maybe none when the teams split in the Labor Day Classic and the Banjo Bowl. But to me, the defenses of Winnipeg and Saskatchewan kind of separate them from the rest right now. I guess we'll see what's up with Edmonton. I mean, I'm not willing to put them in the conversation yet, but they got a home and home against Winnipeg coming up, so they've at least put themselves back in the conversation. To me, it's Winnipeg and the Riders. If you were doing a West power poll right now, taking the standings out of the equation, who's on top for you?
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, that's what I was going to say, the difference between the standings, because the Riders are the best team in the West, based on their record, of course. But I think if you're going power rankings, you have to look at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I know there's a little bit of a caveat there in that they played the BC Lions twice, and it's not the BC Lions from earlier in the season. It's been their kind of late season collapse, because you have to remember that the BC Lions were not playing good football before that 25-0 shutout against the Bombers, and they didn't play great football again by getting dominated by the Elks the next week and then losing again to the Bombers with Rourke behind center. So the Lions, if you're making a power rankings, the Lions would be fifth in the West. So I guess you got to take that into consideration when you're looking at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. But man, I mean, their defense is playing lights out. Their defense is arguably the best in the league right now. Their secondary is certainly among, if not the best in the league right now. And I'm hesitant to say best defense because I don't want to disrespect the 9-1 Montreal Alouettes. And I know Ottawa also has a good defense too, but Winnipeg's defense is playing lights out. They're playing historic over this stretch of football. Even when they were losing, they certainly weren't the problem against Toronto. They weren't the problem in the loss against Saskatchewan earlier this year, and they certainly were the solution in both these last victories against the BC Lions. So, I think the Bombers are playing confident football. They're getting healthy. The offense, I still think you can ask much more from the offense. They're still not playing the way that I think many expected, especially here in Winnipeg, that they would be playing. But I think the O-line is figuring things out here. Communication is getting a lot better. As you mentioned before, Haas, in your show earlier, Brady Oliveira only rushed 10 times, but he averaged 7.8 yards per rush. So the O-line is communicating better. Zach's getting more time behind center, and that's a dangerous thing for the West. But the fact of the matter is, you could literally throw a dart at the board, and whoever you land on might be the best, might end up being first in the West. I mean, we all know Calgary, they're a massive question mark in that we don't know really who they are, but they still have the same record as the Bombers. So if they figure themselves out here over the next couple of weeks, they could do just as much damage.
I think it was Dusty that said earlier, we were talking about Calgary, he said, or maybe it was Farhan on with us earlier this week, that he looks at Calgary, and Calgary has the highest floor but the lowest ceiling. Like, I think Calgary, if things go their way, they're maybe in third place, but they're not really a threat to win it all. Things can change. And again, Edmonton, I mean, people had written them off. Could they? I mean, we've seen this before. Teams get really hot and hit their groove. Chris Jones is gone and maybe turn it around. But I'd be surprised if we're not talking about BC, Winnipeg, and Saskatchewan as those three teams battling. But it's as wide open at this point in the season as I can ever remember, with everybody being in it, and is going to set up what should be an incredible next few weeks. And just for the Bombers and Riders, they got their work to take care of this week. Saskatchewan in Toronto, Winnipeg at home to Hamilton. And then we get going with the trip to Regina for Labor Day weekend. It is always incredible. And I will say this to CFL fans outside of these markets. If you ever really want to take in what the spirit of the CFL is all about, get out to Regina for Labor Day weekend, or try and pop by the Peg for the Banjo Bowl. It is next level, and it is so much fun, and I cannot wait. We're going to be out there with a bunch of Winnipeg Sports Talk listeners, Lock Shoppers, and CFL 110 listeners. And for those of you in Saskatchewan, we'll see you at Wayne's World before the game, or maybe out on the town on Saturday night. Just before we wrap, a quick look at our lines over with our friends at CoolBet. The Riders, 2.5-point underdogs against Chad Kelly and the Argos. A lot of spotlight. This is it.
Interesting.
I'm leaning big time towards the Riders right now. I think that they feel like they owe everybody one after what happened last week. The Bombers went as high, opened at 7.5, went all the way to 10 yesterday. It's 9.5 right now is the line for the Bombers at home to the Ticats, one of the biggest lines we've seen in the league all year long. BC is a 1-point favorite in Ottawa, minus 125 on the money line. You can get the Ottawa Redblacks at even money as a very slight home dog. And that Elks Alouettes game with the return of the Mac and the return of Cody Fajardo. Alouettes 6-point favorites against the Elks. Looks like MBT is going to be starting for Edmonton. And then the return of Trey Ford expected for the Alberta version of the Labor Day Classic between Edmonton and Calgary in the back-to-back. And just in case you were wondering about the CFL futures, everybody, people are paying attention to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The Bombers on Monday morning were 7-1. When we did the lock shop, they were plus 650. By the time we did WST, they were 6-1. The next day, they were plus 575. And now they are plus 500. So 5-1 for the Bombers. I will mention, though, if you are betting at Cool Bet, every week there you have the opportunity with one CFL bet to put a 20% win boost on. That actually applies to the futures, too. So you can get a better number if you'd like it, if you're looking for a futures, by popping that in. Otherwise, throw it on. And a quick plug, tomorrow in the lock shop, Dusty's going to be traveling. Myself and Matt Awanek will be breaking down all the games and making our favorite picks. That's on the Edmonton Sports Talk channel. Noon Winnipeg time, 11 in Edmonton or in Alberta. I can't remember what time it is in Saskatchewan, whether they're our time or their time right now. 1 o'clock Eastern, so jump on in. Hammer, great stuff as always. A lot to cover today. And, man, next week we'll get ready and look ahead to Labor Day weekend in the Canadian Football League when it really gets going in the 3-down game.
You know what they say, Haas, the season doesn't start until Labor Day, and those standings are really suggesting as much. It's going to be an exciting second half here. Certainly these games this week, I'm looking forward to seeing that Saskatchewan-Toronto game. I don't know. It looks like the Vegas odds makers are strongly taking into consideration an MOP return. We'll see how Chad Kelly can fare in his first game back. There's a lot of disrespect in some of those odds, particularly that Ottawa game, I think. But another strong slate of games, and we'll be chopping it all up again next week.
Cannot wait for it. Gang, thanks so much for hanging with us, and thank you again to Garage Living Winnipeg. Check out their website at garageliving.com on how they can completely transform your garage into a place where you'll like to not only work, maybe hang out and watch the game with the fellas on the block as well. You can give our pal Pat Canuga a call, 999-1234. That's area code 204. And again, check out all their work at their website at garageliving.com. For Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Paterson. Enjoy another great week of CFL football, and we'll see you next week heading into Labor Day on CFL 110 right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Hit that sub button as well if you're with us on YouTube.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.